The Galactic Empire had existed for millennia, an iron web of order, law, and domination stretched across thousands of star systems. Species who joined it did so under one of two conditions: submission or extinction. The Council of 12, led by the Emperox, cloaked their coercion in ceremony and treaties, but no one misread their message for long. Humanity had been the exception. They didn't kneel. They bargained, they fought, and they survived, barely. But Earth's resilience in the border skirmishes earned the grudging respect of the Empire's high command. An uneasy alliance was forged. Humanity was permitted a seat at the edge of the table, so long as they remembered their place. General Marcus Vane had never been comfortable at that table. The sole representative of the Terran Defense Corps, he attended Imperial summits in silence, watching and listening, a predator in a room full of calculating snakes. His uniform was clean but unadorned. No medals. No insignias. His presence was enough. Vane wasn't a diplomat. He was a soldier who had outlasted the best of them, and the Empire knew it. Today, the stakes were different. The negotiations on Herix Prime were billed as ceremonial, a final consolidation of power. The Emperox would offer terms that looked generous on paper: shared resource access, increased diplomatic channels, and regional autonomy. But the subtext was clear: Earth would become a tributary. Resistance would mean war, and war with the Empire was a death sentence. The Citadel chamber was carved from obsidian-like stone, seamless and cold. 12 alien dignitaries encircled the central platform, where the Emperox hovered in regal silence. The room was soaked in the smell of incense and ozone, traditions meant to unnerve species who relied on scent as much as sight. Vane stepped forward alone. No aides. No political advisors. Just a man who had earned the right to be there through grit, sacrifice, and victories that left entire enemy fleets drifting as debris. His voice had rarely been heard in these chambers. That was about to change. The Emperox addressed him through an intermediary, a mouthpiece species bred for translation. The offer was read aloud, a gesture masked as generosity. The terms were final. Vane let the silence stretch longer than diplomacy allowed. Every second was a fracture forming in protocol. Finally, he looked straight ahead, eyes locked onto the Emperox's multiple irises. No. A single word. No embellishment. No counteroffer. No confusion. Just pure, unfiltered rejection. The chamber recoiled in a ripple of motionless tension. Not a sound followed, only the disbelieving stillness of those unaccustomed to defiance. Refusals weren't part of this ritual. They were impossible by design. But Vane didn't explain himself. He didn't have to. The word echoed not just in the room, but through the channels of imperial authority. Broadcasts were monitored, leaks were inevitable. The galaxy would hear it. The Emperox remained motionless, but something shifted, subtle, predatory. The 12 dignitaries began murmuring, their alien tongues clashing in disbelief. Someone barked a command. A security detail stepped forward, hesitating just long enough to betray their fear. Vane didn't flinch. His hands remained at his sides. The Imperial guards didn't move closer. Orders were clear. This wasn't the moment to ignite conflict. Humanity does not yield, Vane said, voice low but deliberate. Not to threats, not to illusions of control. We remember how you break your promises. We remember who died trusting your peace. One of the delegates hissed in protest. Another demanded clarification. Vane turned and walked out before they could finish. His refusal wasn't an act of negotiation. It was a declaration. Back aboard his vessel, he gave no press briefing. He made no speeches. He issued no demands. Only a single message was sent from the bridge, transmitted across human-controlled systems. Stand by. It wasn't war, not yet. But the fuse had been lit. And everyone in the galaxy, friend, foe, and observer, understood that something irreversible had just begun. The footage of General Vane's refusal spread faster than any decree the Empire had ever issued. Within hours, over 200 systems had seen the clip, a lone human standing before the might of the Empire and rejecting it without hesitation. No dramatic speech, no violence, just denial. It wasn't supposed to be possible. In the Empire's core worlds, citizens reacted with stunned disbelief. For most, the idea of defying the Emperox was so far outside their cultural norms that the recording was assumed to be propaganda or misinformation. Official state channels dismissed it as a miscommunication. But among the outer worlds, where oppression wore sharper edges, the moment struck differently. Vane became a symbol. Not because he postured, but because he didn't. Across mining colonies worked to death under imperial quotas, and planets still bearing the scars of peacekeeping campaigns, the word "no" began to appear on walls, in encrypted comms, in whispered conversations. One syllable now carried more weight than centuries of diplomacy. On the Imperial Council, the response was panic veiled in arrogance. Military assets were quietly repositioned. Trade routes were audited. Human ships were marked for surveillance. The Empire still viewed itself as untouchable, but the seeds of instability had been scattered. Among the species long subjugated by imperial control, reactions were varied. The Kalari, known for their strict logic and emotional restraint, began issuing private communiques to Earth's outposts, requesting clarification. The Droth, a species nearly wiped out during the Expansion War, declared an emergency conclave to re-evaluate their alliances. Even the Helari nomads, who hadn't spoken to the Council in a century, broke silence to say, "This is the shift we waited for." On Earth, reactions were mixed. Civilians feared retaliation. Some politicians condemned Vane's move, accusing him of jeopardizing fragile diplomatic gains. But within military circles, his name became a quiet rallying point. He hadn't asked for support. He didn't need to. The Terran Defense Corps began silent mobilization. Units were recalled from joint exercises. Supply chains reoriented toward readiness. There were no declarations. Just movement. Humanity had seen betrayal before. The failed Tranquility Pact had promised shared governance over resource clusters, only for Imperial fleets to seize the sectors after extracting their maps from Terran databases. Vane had been there. He'd watched colleagues executed in the name of misunderstanding. He hadn't forgotten. Neither had his command. In the weeks that followed, human-controlled systems grew quiet. Civilian transports followed strict patterns. Defense grids moved to autonomous status. The Empire noticed, but didn't intervene. Not yet. Too many within the Council still believed this could be salvaged, perhaps through a show of force. But the fear wasn't just military. It was ideological. The Empire ruled through inevitability. Once belief in their permanence cracked, control weakened. That crack had formed. The Empire dispatched envoys to human territories under the guise of economic audits. None were permitted to land. Vane's orders were clear: zero engagement. The silence unnerved them more than hostility would have. Within fringe systems, small resistances started activating, cells that had been dormant for decades. They weren't human. They didn't need to be. All they needed was proof that the Empire could be challenged. Vane had provided it. An intercepted transmission from a rebel faction in the Zarash belt said it best. One human said no. Maybe we all can. Back in Imperial Command, internal divisions formed. Some urged an immediate strike. Others warned that overt aggression would validate the rebellion. The Emperox listened to both sides but offered no directive. Hesitation was rare in the Empire. It was noticed. General Vane, meanwhile, offered no public commentary. He issued no ultimatums, made no demands. His silence echoed louder than propaganda ever could. The message had already been received. Something irreversible had begun. Not through warfare, not through diplomacy, but through one refusal that exposed the fragility of a regime built on obedience. The Empire sent a fleet. 37 warships crossed into human space without warning. No statements. No announcements. Their goal was pressure, not destruction. They wanted to make humanity submit through fear. The assumption was simple: Humans would back down when they saw the size of the force. Vane had already prepared. Human intelligence had tracked Imperial fleet movement before launch. Earth's command structure had predicted this response. Defenses were not built for open battle. They were built for disruption. The outer colonies were not strongholds. They were layered with traps. Asteroids had been moved into place to break up formations. Sensor jammers distorted readings. Communications were scrambled. The first wave of ships lost contact, hit interference, and were delayed before firing a single shot. Human ships stayed out of reach. They avoided direct confrontation. Instead, they used decoys, misdirection, and hit-and-run strikes. Imperial ships reported false targets. Drones mimicked heat signatures. Signals bounced between relay buoys to confuse tracking systems. The fleet became unsure of what was real. When Imperial forces landed on the surface, they found changed landscapes. Maps were wrong. Buildings had been moved or disguised. Roads led nowhere. Human forces struck quickly and vanished. Supplies were cut off. Extraction points were lost. The terrain worked against them. Artificial storms were used to ground transports. Magnetic pulses disrupted engines. In some zones, gravity fields were altered to affect troop movement. Imperial soldiers found themselves walking into dead zones without warning. Some never returned. Others were captured without a fight, left disoriented and isolated. Human commanders did not seek territory. Every move was to delay, confuse, and wear down the enemy. Psychological tactics were constant. Imperial units reported voices in the static, fake distress calls, and system errors that led to panic. Morale began to drop. 7 ships were lost by the 3rd day. Not all destroyed, some were disabled and abandoned. Others were turned against each other through false orders. In one case, a destroyer fired on its own escort ship after receiving a spoofed attack warning. Human systems had infiltrated the fleet's communication links and used them against them. Imperial officers were trained for direct action. They were not trained for this. They followed procedure. The humans did not. Every response was a test. Every reaction was observed and logged. Human AI processed data in real time and updated tactics without delay. The Empire continued to press forward, but their progress slowed. Ships needed repairs. Units needed rest. Commanders were unsure who to trust. Messages from Central Command were delayed or went missing. Some ships acted without orders. Others waited and did nothing. The fleet lost cohesion. On the 7th day, a single human message was sent. "You do not belong here. Leave." No threats. No conditions. Just a statement. Within hours, Imperial ships began to pull back. First the damaged ones, then the rest. Not all at once. Slowly, and without a word. Human forces did not chase them. There were no victories announced. No parades. It wasn't about defeating them in combat. It was about making the cost too high. The Empire had assumed strength would be enough. It wasn't. The battle never had a name. There was no single decisive moment. Just a slow, steady unraveling of power. The Empire did not lose because it was weak. It lost because it was unprepared for a war it couldn't define. Vane did not speak. He did not need to. His silence said what everyone already knew. The Empire had entered human space with confidence. It left with doubt. The Empire blamed failure on command errors. Reports were rewritten. Logs redacted. Officers reassigned. But the facts couldn't be erased. The fleet had entered human space and returned damaged, disorganized, and afraid. Questions followed. Rumors spread. Authority slipped. On fringe worlds, local governors hesitated to enforce imperial laws. Rebellions that had gone silent decades ago resurfaced. The word, refusal, became common in encrypted channels. Small groups across different systems began to act. Protests turned into raids. Local defense units turned a blind eye. The Empire had relied on obedience. That grip was no longer secure. The Imperial Council argued behind closed doors. Some demanded immediate escalation. Others warned of collapse if control was pushed too hard. No consensus formed. Each faction blamed the others for the crisis. The Emperox did not intervene. That silence caused more damage than any attack. Without direction, cracks widened. Vane's forces held their line. They didn't advance, didn't retaliate. That restraint made the Empire more nervous than any military action. It forced them to respond without knowing the goal. Each move made without understanding became a liability. Officials grew cautious. Commanders stopped trusting orders. Allies of the Empire started to question their commitments. The Tarsari Republic paused trade routes. The Bolan syndicates cancelled joint patrols. A respected general from the Vakari defected, bringing full divisions with him. He didn't ask for support from Earth. He just said he believed humans had shown another way. Inside core worlds, control slipped further. Surveillance hubs stopped reporting. News platforms ran unauthorized segments about the failed campaign. A former Imperial minister gave an anonymous interview stating the obvious. "We were never prepared to fight people who don't want power." The statement went viral across 10 sectors. Civil resistance movements gained momentum. Not because of human outreach, but because of observation. The Empire had lost legitimacy not through war, but through hesitation. Its subjects had learned something simple: if they stood up, the Empire might not strike back. Vane avoided public communication. Earth issued no demands. That lack of ambition disarmed propaganda efforts. The Empire couldn't call them invaders or terrorists. They weren't expanding. They weren't claiming territory. They were just standing, unchanged, unmoved. Attempts to reframe the narrative failed. Holonet anchors repeated state-approved scripts, but audiences declined. State loyalty campaigns saw low turnout. Instructors in imperial academies reported cadets openly criticizing orders. Disobedience had gone from rare to common. Not loud, just firm. In private councils, the Emperox ordered containment protocols. But no new fleets were launched. Resources were redirected to internal stability. Military units were recalled to protect capital worlds. Strategic focus shifted from expansion to survival. Empire-wide recruitment dropped. Some species refused conscription. Others disappeared from the rolls entirely. Logistics chains began to fail. Starports shut down for maintenance. Black market networks replaced state systems. The center could no longer hold the edges. Earth proposed a new framework called the Concord of Sovereign Species. It wasn't a government. It wasn't a military alliance. It was a voluntary agreement based on non-interference, mutual defense, and open exchange. No pressure was applied. No enforcement mechanisms were included. Yet over 24 worlds signaled interest within the first week. The Empire dismissed it as symbolic. But diplomats from neutral systems requested briefings. Some even traveled to human sectors, unescorted, to listen. They found no demands. Just an invitation. The Emperox finally issued a direct order: mobilize a second strike. But it came too late. Half the generals delayed action. A few refused outright. One planetary governor announced independence before Imperial forces could respond. The message was short. We choose to stand with the ones who said no. Vane remained silent. He continued his work, reinforcing supply lines, training units, preparing defenses. He wasn't building an empire. He was making sure Earth wouldn't need one. The Empire hadn't collapsed yet, but its center was empty. The fall had already started. The final push never came. The Empire, once feared across galaxies, never launched its promised counteroffensive. Its fleets remained docked. Its leaders issued orders few followed. The systems under its flag no longer listened. They had seen the truth. Power didn't make obedience permanent. Fear didn't last forever. The Concord of Sovereign Species expanded without resistance. More worlds signed on quietly. No force was used. No promises were made. Each member joined on their own terms. Trade began to move freely again, Not because of treaties, but because trust replaced control. Human systems acted as hosts, not rulers. Requests were handled, not commanded. The empire didn't dissolve in battle. It fractured from inside. Loyalist worlds broke ties. Some formed their own governance. Others joined the concord without fanfare. The emperors vanished from public view. No official statement was made. The seat of power remained occupied, but hollow. Authority had become ceremonial. Vane never took a title. He didn't lead a government, form a bloc, or rewrite policy. He refused interviews. He gave no speeches. He stayed within the defense corps, overseeing transitions, helping other systems secure their independence, advising without command. Every invitation to rule was declined. His refusal had not changed. His name became a point of reference across educational archives and political records. Students learned about the event without rhetoric. One man said no. That moment reshaped a galactic structure that had survived untouched for generations. Not through war. Through limits. A refusal to accept the terms offered. Rebuilding took time. Damage caused by the old order couldn't be undone with one shift. Some systems fell into disorder. Others struggled to manage their new independence. But they did so freely. No foreign ships appeared. No demands followed. Mistakes were allowed. Growth came slower but deeper. Humanity did not rise as a new empire. It remained alert but distant. Its fleets stayed within their space. Its defense networks remained online but inactive. Coordination continued through voluntary channels. Security was shared, not imposed. No conquest followed. No expansion was planned. Former enemies of Earth began formal communication. Dialogues opened where only conflict had existed. Even those who once saw humans as unstable now viewed them with quiet respect. They had chosen not to dominate when they had the chance. That choice changed minds more than any victory. Documents leaked years later confirmed what many suspected. At the peak of its crisis, the Empire had considered planetary strikes against Earth. Strategic targets had been marked. The order had been written. But it was never sent. Too many feared the cost. Not military. Moral. They knew it would not just start war, it would confirm weakness. Vane eventually stepped away from all positions. No ceremony followed. He simply left. No one knew where he went. The Defense Corps released a brief note. General Marcus Vane has completed his service. Nothing else was added. Over time, myths grew. Some claimed he lived among neutral colonies. Others believed he had died in silence. None were confirmed. His absence became part of the story. A man who had acted when needed, then walked away when it was done. In academies across the galaxy, leadership courses used his name not as an idol, but as an example. He hadn't chased power, but stability. He had not responded with anger, but discipline. He had not ruled, but refused. Generations later, the moment still held. Students studied the clip. A single word. Quiet. Measured. Unshaken. It remained the most replayed communication in galactic history. One man stood in a chamber of power and said no. That was all it took.